Lieb nach dem Kampf.
Mr. Haggard, you were telling me about the Empress of Canada, and you were telling me about your duties as a wireless telegrapher aboard that vessel. During that time, did you have the opportunity of transporting Canadian troops to Europe?
Yes. We went to Halifax once and brought a whole bunch of Canadian troops to Britain. Yes, that's right. We picked them up in Halifax. I talked to them all. They all looked very tall, very handsome, and they were in good, friendly relations with the man in charge. You know, they said, we're going to stick right by you and that sort of thing. I liked the spirit. The spirit was extremely good.
Did you notice what unit or what regiment
No,
those
I don't.
men
I
were
wouldn't
from?
know what it was. No.
You were pleased that they were Canadians?
Oh yes, and a matter of fact, I saw a lot of Canadians in England. At that time, I couldn't speak French, and they were all speaking French. One of those good, or Scotland. I saw them somewhere. You know, they had Canadian flag, but I spoke to them in English. But I was quite at that time I couldn't speak French. I do now. I was treated with courtesy with everybody, as far as I could see. I went down. I have a lot of time ashore. I went down to see where Robbie Burns was born, and I went round the Trossachs, and everywhere I went, I seemed to find people most agreeable to me. I do really. I don't drink at all, you know, and I'm friendly, and I was quite happy there. As a matter of fact, on the ship, the people on the ship felt more comfortable in Glasgow than they did in Liverpool. They felt they're more like us. That's what they thought.
A viewer named Rachel made a comment stating, "Now you have to make a video on what the American and British soldiers thought of the Canadian soldiers." Thank you, Rachel. I took your advice and wanted to start with this video about what the British soldiers thought of Canadian soldiers in World War II. In this oppressive barracks town, the Canadians got their first impression of England. They did not like it very much. British Lieutenant David John Warren served with the 1st Battalion of the Royal Hampshire Regiment, 231st Independent Infantry Brigade in Sicily and Italy, from July to October 1943. Awarded the Military Cross during the invasion of Italy in 1943 and a Distinguished Service Order for D-Day. Atrocities: Canadian POWs being lynched in a Sicilian orchard by the Germans. Retelling about German POWs who spit and cursed at their British captors after just being captured. Interviewer: Did you start to hit them? Warren: To hit them, yes, and anyway I stopped any question of doing them real injury, but they appeared to ask for it, and it would not have surprised me if there had been some shooting, because in Sicily there have been some incidents where our people, the Canadians in this case, found that their prisoners had been hanged in an orchard, and of course this stirred them up a lot. And of course feelings weren't very high in the war, as you can imagine, and this was an incident that might have gone wrong. When you mentioned that case of atrocity with the lynching of POWs in the orchard, how did you get to know about that? Well, on the battlefield, of course, a rumor travels fast, or stories travel fast, and I expect we got it from the Canadians, because we were under the command of the Canadian Division, and various sort of tanks and various troops of theirs would be pretty close nearby. British Sergeant Roy Charles Hamlin, 282nd Company, Royal Army Service Corps. While attached to the 3rd Canadian Infantry Division on Juno Beach in the D-Day landings, Sergeant Hamlin drove a Foden 10-ton truck ashore with ammunition and supplies. He spoke of Allied revenge on the Germans. Interviewer: What impression of the Canadians did you get? Hamlin: We were all right. There was always, what shall I say, a little bit of friction between some of the lads who seemed to regard our country as being all preserved, and what were we doing with all the, well, it's not foreign, but whatever they call them, you know, outside troops coming in. But that never applied to me. But the Canadian boys, they were all right. I mean, I have to jump the gun a little bit now on that, because if I come to the concentration area where we were finally penned in behind the barbed wire on Southampton Common, then we were right in the mix with them. We were all mixed in. We were going to be a part of an invasion unit, and so you had to get on. I mean, they had a different style of life. Most of these Canadian boys, we found out, well, they're not all together because they believed in the morality of World War II, because they weren't threatened by anyone over there, but simply because of the enormous depression that Canada had gone through. And to them, the simple fact of being in the army was employment. They were being paid instead of being on the breadline, which they were out in Canada itself. World War II actually made the economy of Canada the same as it enhanced America. Actually, if you can put it in those terms, that it came as a blessing to Canada in one sense, that it helped them enormously. I mean, the war effort, the civilian war effort in Canada, the supplying of the materials that was needed. It created markets that were not there, not previous to the war. So that was it with the Canadian troops, that they were there because it was employment. They had a job, they were quite happy with that. What was their different method of going on? With Canadians, yes. When we were in the concentration area, we were with the French-speaking. Why I hesitated then, I was trying to think of the actual unit, but it was a French unit and they still remembered Dieppe. That was Operation Jubilee, the Allied raid on Dieppe, France, August 19, 1942. Although they weren't implicated with Dieppe, they weren't part of it, but they still remembered. What did they say about it? That they wanted revenge, which of course some of them did. Where did they get revenge on the Germans? On the beachhead, but unfortunately this is one of the sad cases that we came across immediately after the landings when bodies had to be moved. And these bodies were in German uniforms with their throats cut. And we found that they weren't truly the Wehrmacht at all, that they were impounded labor from different countries of Eastern Europe that had been pressed into service to work on the Atlantic Wall, and that they weren't really the German soldier that the French Canadians thought they were. It was one of the unfortunate aspects that you come across with wartime. Did you see anybody with their throats cut? Well, we had to move bodies. Where was this? Off Bagnols-sur-Mer, where we landed. How many of them? Probably half a dozen, but it's not a very nice story, but it's reality. Who had done it? That's all you can say. It's not for anybody to condemn or to implicate. My niece and nephew live in Edmonton. They were very interested, in the Canadian participation course, and they sent me a really good book. It's called Bloody Victory, and it is a Canadian version of the D-Day invasion. And of course, as they say, that mostly if you read of any Canadian participation, it's British. So they have given the simple story of the Canadians. And they did admit that, unfortunately, these sort of things did happen. Were these bodies with their throats cut in uniform or not? Yes, they were marked. Yeah, they were part of the German army, and they were conscripted into it for the main purpose of being labor for the Atlantic Wall. If they weren't there, we know for a fact that they would have been pressed into something other in Germany, or even on the Russian front. And to a lot of them, it was far better to be impressed into the Atlantic Wall workers rather than the alternative. So this was at Bagnols-sur-Mer? Yes, but it would be off, somewhere around that locality. We actually landed between Bagnols and Courcelles, which was the next town over. Was this on D-Day itself that you moved these bodies? Yeah. On behalf of us all, I want to give a very hearty welcome to the Canadian troops now joining the 8th Army. I know well the fighting men of Canada. They are magnificent soldiers. I regard you now as one of the veteran divisions of this army, just as good as any, if not better. I knew the Canadians on the Western Front in the last war, and there were no finer soldiers anywhere. I wonder what they would say to you now if they could speak to you. I think they would say something like this: "Well done. We have handed you the sword, and you have wielded it well and truly." One source stated that British soldiers looked down on Canadian soldiers, were very cold to them, considered them colonials, and Canada an uncivilized country. The Canadian Army now stationed in England has chafed not to find itself in contact with the enemy, but I am here to tell you that it has stood and still stands in the key position to strike at the invader should he land upon our shores. In a press conference with Churchill in Washington on December 23, 1941, U.S. President Franklin Roosevelt said, "There are a good many nations beside our own that are at war." Churchill, Seated beside him, quickly added, "Canada." Roosevelt replied, "Yes, Canada, as the Prime Minister suggests, is also," Churchill interrupted, "in the line." Ever since then, Canadians have been in the line. I saw there in Italy Canadians, South Africans, and New Zealanders. As I saw our lads from all our countries so fine and gallant, I was thrilled with pride. Canadian troops showed skill, endurance, and a steadiness under fire that won wide admiration among their British comrades.